Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anil Deolalikar. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Policy, and I would like to welcome you all to today's very special event. We have many other events like this as part of the School of Public Policy seminar series, and you can learn more about them by going to our website. But today we have the very distinct honor of welcoming to our campus Robert Reich, renowned political economist, professor, author, and political commentator. Reich is currently Chancellor's Professor of Public Policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley. He previously taught at Harvard and Brandeis Universities and served in the administrations of Presidents Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton. Indeed, he was the Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration most recently. Bob has also been a contributing editor of the New Republic, the American Prospect, Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Our time with Professor Reich is unfortunately quite limited, as he has to catch the last Southwest flight to Oakland tonight. And so we have arranged the program around this schedule. We will start with brief remarks. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to invite Professor Reich to come out here and speak to you briefly. And then we are going to screen the first 45 minutes of his documentary, Inequality for All. Then we'll stop the documentary and have a Q&A of about half an hour. And I think you all have been asked, just because we have limited time and we want to be quite efficient, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions, write down your questions and send them to me here in the front, and I'll ask those questions on your behalf to Professor Reich. Now, before I bring him on stage, I just want to briefly explain the primary reason why Professor Reich is here today. Among his many notable credentials is that Professor Reich is currently a senior fellow of the Blum Center, the Richard Blum Center for Developing Economies at UC Berkeley. And it gives me great pleasure to have Professor Reich here in the audience and announce to all of you that thanks to the generosity of Regent Richard Blum, and thanks to matching contributions from the UC Office of the President and from our own Chancellor, Kim Wilcox, UCR will also be starting our very own Blum initiative for global and regional poverty this coming fall. With the counties of Riverside and San Bernardino having some of the highest poverty rates among the nation's 25 largest metropolitan areas, the vision of the Blum Initiative at UCR School of Public Policy is to conduct research, teaching, and outreach that focuses attention on poverty in inland Southern California, and that ultimately helps policy agencies and community-based organizations to combat poverty and improve the lives of the poor in this region. With the Blum Initiative, we hope to establish an undergraduate minor in poverty here at UCR, just as has been done at the Blum Center in Berkeley. We hope to develop a course in global and regional poverty that would be offered to all majors on campus, and we hope to develop a specialization area in poverty and inequality for our upcoming Master of Public Policy program that launches this fall. In addition, the Blum Initiative will establish grants, small grants for faculty with the best ideas for poverty-based action research. And the initiative will also encourage faculty across different disciplines to collaborate on problem-focused research with community partners. Finally, the Blum Initiative will also allow undergraduate and graduate students on campus the opportunity to undertake poverty-related internships with local government agencies and non-profit and non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations. Professor Reich has generously offered his time today to visit UCR and present his documentary, his very popular documentary, which is available on Netflix, but now you will get to see it here on the big screen, Inequality for All, in anticipation of this new and exciting Blum Poverty Initiative at UCR. So without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Robert Reich to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Anil. And let me just say, Anil, thank you. And I am so excited about the new Blum Center here at UC Riverside. I'm also very delighted to be here because there is probably no place that I know of that better exemplifies what higher education ought to be doing and what it ought to be doing in America than UC Riverside. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have in this country with regard to inequality, and suddenly every politician is talking about inequality, not only Democratic politicians, but Republican presidential aspirants, they're talking about the problem of inequality. Well, that's great. I'm glad everybody's talking about it. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And one of the most important things we can do about it is create avenues, ladders of upward opportunity and upward mobility for a lot of people to get better jobs and make more of themselves and have a better life. And UC Riverside is doing that. It is extraordinary in terms of the numbers of first-generation students who are here, who have never gone to college before, the first in their families to go to college. The number of undergraduates here at Riverside who qualify for Pell Grants, and that's a rough approximation for families who are in need. I don't think there's any institution of higher education of this degree of prestige and excellence that has this large a percentage of undergraduates who are Pell Grant eligible. So you have here, in essence, what I would hope would be cloned across the country. An institution that really does provide opportunities. And a community. I also want to say something else. I came to Riverside, let's see, I was here for the first time about 20 years ago. Believe it or not, I know that I look younger, but I was, at that time I was Secretary of Labor, and I came here to visit Riverside Community College. Some of you maybe don't remember my visit, but let me just say that it was a great visit. But I was struck by the community. This is a wonderful community in terms of its dedication to provide opportunities to get involved, to roll up their sleeves. This is a community that in many ways is very importantly connected to the university and the university to the community. And so many of you are from the community. I want to thank you for your work and also your commitment to the university. And I am looking forward to answering your questions. Anil and I are going to sit here. What we're going to do, as Anil said, is show the first half of a film that I made with a very talented young director who came to me, about 3.5 years ago, and he said, I want to make a film about widening inequality in America based upon your work. And I said, you must be out of your mind. And he said, no, I think it's possible, and I would like to do it. And he was so talented, and he is so talented, that he did this film, and the film has got a lot of awards. It won the Special Jury Award at the Sundance Film Festival. It has been seen. It's available on Netflix and all over the place. But more importantly, Jake Kornbluth, and that's his name, Jake Kornbluth's film really has galvanized part of the national debate over what we need to do about widening inequality. You will see the first half, and then we're going to break for a conversation because I do have to catch a plane. That conversation between Anil and Anil will collect your questions and read the questions to me, and we'll have a conversation. You can think about that. We'll go for about 20 minutes or maybe a half hour. Think about it as a commercial break. And then hopefully you will be curious enough to stick around for the second half of the film. And I'm going to have to run off to catch a plane. I probably, if you leave, you may come across me leaving. I'll know who you are. But I don't want to, I don't want to keep you on, but I do hope you do have a chance to see the entire film. And again, thank you for your extraordinary hospitality, and thank you, this community and UC Riverside, for what you are accomplishing. Thank you. And so, Mike, we'll start the film anytime you can.
This really is like a commercial break, because I found the film so engrossing that it's difficult to stop it right now. But I think since we have limited time here, and Professor Reich is with us for another half an hour, we will get to the questions.
Actually, I should say the second half of the film is far better than the first half.
So, I have a few questions now. I think there are people in the corridors who have more questions and will be collecting your index cards, but I have a few that I was already handed over, that were handed over to me earlier. So one of the questions is, Bob, what was your biggest mistake as the Secretary of Labor? What is the one thing everyone should know?
About my biggest mistake?
Well,
Why don't we start at a more positive note?
What do you think? I presume the questioner wants to know what would you have done differently?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there are many things I would have done differently. For one thing, I would have fought harder to get a better deal for American workers under the North American Free Trade Act. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of jobs were lost. A lot of jobs were lost to Mexico and then to China, although China was not part of the North American Free Trade Act. But I think that our trade deals, right up to the deal that's now being cooked up, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are not helping the poor and the working class and a lot of the middle class in America. They're very, very good for big corporations and for Wall Street, but I think working people are getting the short end of the stick. I would have fought harder against NAFTA.
Great. I think that's a great answer.
Well, I'm not sure it's a great answer, but it's the only answer I have.
I think you have answered the questioner's intent. How do you answer critics who say that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour will hurt local businesses?
Look, there is a great deal of controversy over raising the minimum wage. There always has been. But if you took the minimum wage we had in, let's say, 1968, for example, and you simply kept it exactly where it was in 1968, adjusted for inflation, it would be $10 and about $10.40 today. Now that assumes no increase in the productivity of the American workforce at all over those years. If you throw into that calculation increase in productivity of American workers, it would be around $15 an hour. Just where we were in 1968. I believe that the bulk of the evidence shows that if you put more money in people's pockets by raising the minimum wage, they turn around, and these are mostly relatively low-income people, they turn around and they buy everything. They use all of that money to buy. And that buying has a multiplier effect. It creates more jobs because obviously businesses do more business. And most of the evidence shows that to be the case. I remember in 1996, when I suggested to President Bill Clinton that he raise the minimum wage for the first time in many years, he was not particularly excited about the prospect. He thought that was kind of it would lose jobs, and he was worried about that. And he decided to have a poll taken. In fact, he asked me to ask his pollster, Dick Morris. I don't know how many of you remember Dick Morris. A terrible person. And but Dick Morris, no, he is pretty bad. Dick Morris did a poll to find out how many people wanted a minimum wage raised. And he came back the next day and he was amazed. He found that 85% of Americans wanted the minimum wage to be raised. I don't know how he did polls so fast. I think he must have polled his family. I think that's what he did. But Bill Clinton saw that, and then we took the results to Congress, and we did get, even a Republican, this was a Republican Congress. Republicans had controlled the Senate and the House. We got the first minimum wage in a very long time. People were concerned about job losses. The fact of the matter is that after the minimum wage of 1996 was raised, we created, or at least the Clinton administration presided over an economy that created 22 million net new jobs. That's more new jobs over that period of time than had ever been created over a similar period of time in the United States. I'm not saying the minimum wage did it, but I'm saying that there's very little evidence that the minimum wage stopped job creation. I think we need to raise the minimum wage again. It's long overdue, and I would say let's raise it to $15 an hour.
Now, here's an interesting question. Why do you think Democrats are not adopting more populist stances on important issues, like the TPP, for instance?
Well, I think part of the problem is that Democrats need to fund their campaigns. And they are going to the same funding sources as the Republicans. That is CEOs, big businesses, Wall Street, very wealthy individuals. And those funding sources have a tendency to dampen the populist ardor of candidates who take the money. I mean, you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. Let's face it. Get big money out of politics is exactly right. Exactly right.
Recently, it was reported that you were a group of 200 economists and academics that have given economic advice to Hillary Clinton on her potential presidential run. Can you tell us what advice you gave her, and how receptive was she to your advice?
No. Well, that's the first. Look, I'll give it my advice to anybody who asks. I mean, if Ted Cruz called me tomorrow, I would give him I'll give my economic advice to anybody who wants it. I should say, just one word about Hillary Clinton, and I'd appreciate it if you kept what I'm about to say in this room. Will you? Because I've known her since she was 19 years old. When she was a freshman at college, I was a sophomore at college. I had a date with her. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Great. You have addressed this question to some extent, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you feel is the role of public universities in the U.S. economy and in U.S. society, especially in terms of closing the income gap?
Look, I used to teach at Harvard and Brandeis. I came out to California to teach in the greatest university system, public university system in America, the University of California. The University of California and the state university system, and I might also add California's community colleges, are the crown jewels of the America's educational system. And California is still living off the legacy of the investments California made in public education, including public higher education, between World War II and most of those investments between World War II and the early 1980s. We have not been investing adequately in public higher education over the last 20 years. In fact, in the late 1960s, public higher education in California was free. And I want to say something about that. Because right now, tuitions have risen a great deal. The state legislature, over several different administrations, have pulled money out of the University of California system, out of the California state system, out of community colleges. This is one of the singular, most stupid moves any state can make. This is like eating our seed corn. These investments in state higher education have a huge public return. To think of public higher education as an individual investment is wrong. It is a public good.
Let me just say that we have a few more questions to go through, but if you have any questions, please, I don't know who's distributing index cards, but please send them around because we'll probably have time to ask you a question. Here's a question for you, Bob. What are your thoughts on income inequality within the University of California system?
Well, I think there are two kinds of inequalities that we ought to talk about or focus on in the University of California system. One has to do with who gets to go to the University of California. I mean, there are many, many young people who go to California high schools, for example, who, because the high schools do not provide the kind of education they need and deserve, are not even eligible for the University of California system. That, to me, is a crying shame. That is something that has to be changed. Everybody in California, in the K through 12 system, who does reasonably well ought to have a chance to get an excellent public higher education. There's a second issue having to do with the formula for distributing funding to the various University of California colleges and universities. My view here is that we need to make sure that universities like UCal Riverside get the funding they need given the populations they serve. And it's very, I think that formula has to be re-examined. I'm not saying we want to pit universities like University of California Riverside against Berkeley and UCLA, but I think that we need a fair allocation. The entire system needs and deserves more resources.
Okay, great, thank you. In your film, you discuss the importance of labor unions and the workers' ability to collective bargaining.
Oh, that reminds me one other thing. I'm sorry, Anil. I wanted to say one other thing. We also have workers at the University of California who deserve to have the right, a kind of acknowledgement that they are contributors to our communities and to our systems. There are many workers in the University of California system that are not earning an adequate income. And that is something that many of us need to pay attention to. And meanwhile, we have football coaches. I better not go there. I'm not going to go there.
Okay. Here's coming back to the issue of labor unions. You discussed the importance of labor unions and the workers' ability to collective bargaining. However, it seems that Americans just do not see the benefit of being part of a union anymore. How can we change the trend of declining union membership in this country?
This is something that's very easily misunderstood. I talk about labor unions with my students, and they don't have a memory. Even many of their parents don't remember a time in America, as I talked about in the movie. In the mid-1950s, more than a third of all private sector workers belonged to the union. When you had that density of unionization, that meant that union contracts set prevailing wages through most of the economy. And that meant that workers had enough bargaining power to get a fair share of the gains of economic growth. Now we have fewer than 7% of private sector workers are unionized. Under these circumstances, most Americans don't even understand the value of labor unions because they don't remember when unions were that powerful. I think particularly in low-wage industries, fast food, janitor, Walmarts, big retail, we need to have unions. And I think that we've got to all get behind fast food workers and retail workers and Walmart workers who are struggling, and they are very, very much struggling to get a union.
Now, this question pertains to what is happening here in this region. And the question says, a large portion of the Inland Empire, which is the area inland Southern California that we call, a large portion of the Inland Empire is based on, is sort of transitioning into a logistics hub for the Western United States. Is it possible that the Inland Empire will suffer from overexpansion of this industry and adversely affect both upward mobility and broader benefits?
Well, inside that question are really two questions about distributional and wholesale businesses, whether they pay enough, and also whether there are avenues of upward mobility. And the answer to both, unfortunately, right now is no. They're not paying enough. I think part of that is because of a lack of unionization, lack of minimum wage. Going back to the minimum wage here in California, if the minimum wage in California, the highest cost of living state in the United States, if the minimum wage were raised to $15 an hour in California, we're not talking about just low-income workers. 32% of California workers would be affected. Can I just repeat that? Almost a third of all workers in California would get a raise if the minimum wage were raised to $15 an hour. That would have a huge effect, not only in the Inland Empire, but across the state. We're not... I want to also emphasize that there's something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. That's a wage subsidy. If we do both, we raise the minimum wage and we also expand the Earned Income Tax Credit, we can actually lift a lot of our workforce to a reasonable standard of living. Not an elegant, not a rich standard of living, but at least a minimally adequate standard of living. And once you have that, you have at least the beginnings. You can get your feet on the first rungs of the income ladder and begin to work your way up. And your children can as well. I think we all have a stake in making that happen.
Great. Now, here's another interesting question. Assume you were elected President of the United States tomorrow. What is the first thing...
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What is the first thing you would want to accomplish to address the problem of inequality?
Well, the first thing I would do is have every American watch this film. And I say that mostly in jest, but I think it's really important that we understand the nature of the problem. There's so much ideology, there's so much misinformation. Before we as Americans can roll up our sleeves and get on with what has to be done. And we are very, very good at doing that. When we understand the nature of a problem, time and again, we put ideology aside and we get on with the actual practical issues and the practical challenge. So we have to know what the challenge is. Part of the challenge has to do with education. We've talked about that. Part of the challenge has to do with the minimum wage. But there is an additional part of the challenge that I touched on. And that is that when money moves, more and more of the resources, the income and wealth in a society moves to the very top, so does political power, particularly if you don't have any restrictions on the amount of money that people at the top, including big corporations, Wall Street, can use in the political process. And you see you get into a vicious cycle, because the more money that goes to the top, the more political lobbying, the more political contributions come from big corporations, Wall Street, and very wealthy individuals, the more the rules of the game are tilted in the direction of people at the top because they want Wall Street bailouts, they want corporate welfare, they want a system that provides low taxes for people at the top, a lot of, the carried interest loophole for hedge fund and private equity managers. We could go on. It's a very long list. But that means that the rest of us are facing a system that is more and more rigged against average working people. So we've got to get, as I said before, but I want to emphasize this, the first thing I would do as president is get big money out of politics. I would... Now, how do we do that? Well, number one, we reverse Citizens United, which is I would make sure that there are Supreme Court justices that are absolutely intent and committed to reversing that. Number two, we have public financing of elections. But I'm not running. And number three, we've got to have full disclosure of every source of every dollar that is invested in influencing campaigns.
So this question is from a person who's a lecturer at UCR, and he says, there are currently 1 to 1.5 million college teachers who are part-time lecturers. Given that adjuncts and lecturers are fighting for their rights in the UC system, the reader sort of wants to know what your views are on enabling them to have more sort of formal employment and better worker rights within the UC system.
Well, I think lecturers and adjuncts are the part-time itinerant workers of the UC system, but they are in every university, and they reflect what's happening in the economy as a whole. More and more full-time jobs are becoming part-time jobs or contract jobs or basically going to consultants or people who are freelancers. The whole idea of the old employment contract was steady employment and predictable employment and a fair bargain. What we have seen increasingly is that full-time work is decreasing. Whether we're talking about universities, we're talking about the private sector, large corporations, even small corporations, full-time work is being replaced by contingent work. And that means all of the labor protections that have grown up over the last 80 years in the United States basically are vanishing. Social Security, minimum wage, 40-hour work week with time and a half for overtime, workers' compensation, all of the worker safety, everything else is disappearing in this on-demand economy. And I'm talking about not only adjuncts and lecturers in universities, I'm talking about Uber drivers and all of the people who are have lost their footing in this economy, who are now part-time workers. 2/3 of Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck. Many of them are part-time. Many of them have put together 2 or 3 or 4 part-time jobs. Many people in this room are in that 2/3. And many of them feel like they're personally responsible, that they have failed in some way, that they are people who have kind of been the losers, and they take personal responsibility. They don't know they are in the majority. They don't know that this economy is shifting and has shifted against most working people. That has to be changed, and it can be changed, but it can only be changed if people understand that they are in the same boat, if they work together, if they mobilize and organize and energize each other and take a much more active role in politics.
Given the present political environment of a do-nothing Congress, how can a Democratic president push through a program of infrastructure investment, education, and some of the other things you talked about.
Well, you blame, or the questioner, Anil, blames the so-called do-nothing Congress. Here's the problem, and I've worked and had the privilege of working very closely with a number of presidents, and I can tell you that presidents can only lead fundamental change if they have the people behind them. There is no president who is able to actually change the economy or society in a fundamental way unless a critical number of Americans are working to change society in the same direction. Some of you, well, in the presidential election of 1936, which I do not remember, this is a story, but it's a true story. Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for a second term, and a lady stopped him at a campaign stop and said, "Mr. President, if you're reelected, I want you to promise me that you'll do X and Y and Z and A and B." And she had a whole list of things she wanted Franklin D. Roosevelt to do if he were reelected. And he said to her, and this is actually, the more I have thought about this, the more profound it is. He said, "Ma'am, I would like to do all of those things. But if I am reelected, you must make me do them." Now, what did he mean by "you must make me do them"? What he meant is that if he's reelected president, just as he had it in terms of the first term, he can only do it if Americans insist that it be done. The forces of the status quo, the forces of just not making change, the forces of, in many respects, big business and Wall Street and wealthy people, but really the forces of keeping things as they are overwhelming in Washington and also to a large extent in state capitals. And this is why political engagement is so important. You know, I talked to, well, one of the things that makes me optimistic is not only our history, because I know that we, when things get off track, when capitalism goes off track, as I think it is today, we get it back on track, and we've done that about every 30 or 40 years. But I'm also optimistic because I surround myself almost every day with young people between the ages of 18 to 25. Being a university professor has the great advantage of being in contact with young people who are idealistic, who want to change the country, who are dedicated to public service. But unfortunately today, too many young people look at politics and they hold their nose. They say, "I don't want to get involved in politics because it is so rotten. I'm going to have to compromise my principles. It is so corrupt." I say back to them, as I want to say to many of the young people here in this audience, if you give up on politics, if you are cynical about politics, you give up on our democracy. And if you give up on our democracy, you are basically giving up on the possibilities of fundamental change. You are ceding, C-E-D-I-N-G, you are giving up and ceding the entire system to the moneyed interests that do not want change, that want things exactly as they are today. And we must not do that.
Well, on that note, we have to end the Q&A because Professor Reich and Heather Lofthouse, whom I forgot to thank. Heather is from the Blum Center for Developing
Yes,
Economies.
Heather, stand up. I want to thank you. Heather has made this possible.
They had to rush to the airport, but thank you so much for coming out to UC Riverside today, and we really enjoyed and we will continue to enjoy the movie.
Anil, thank you. I hope you get a chance to stay for the far better and more interesting half of the movie. And I want to thank you for everything you are doing here at UC Riverside. I am very inspired by my visit here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.